Good morning, my friends. Today we're going to be studying the third chapter in the Laws of Studying of Torah, the Laws of Talmud Torah. And over here, the Rambam discusses the specialty and the importance of learning Torah and how it should be done, and what an amazing idea and an amazing concept it is that we are able to study Torah. So he begins by telling us that the Jewish people were crowned with 3 crowns. God gave us a gift, 3 different crowns. We have the crown of priesthood, of kehuna, of a Kohen, which that was given to Aaron and his children. We have the crown of kingship, which that was given to David and his children. And then we have the crown of Torah. And the crown of Torah was given to every single Jew. It was given to us at Mount Sinai, to every single Jewish people, throughout the entire history, up until today and forever. And every single person has gotten this inheritance of the Torah, as it says in the verse, that Moses gave the Torah to each and every Jew from God as an inheritance for all the Jewish people. And therefore, every single person is able to come and study Torah and have a part in it. And no one can say, "Oh, it doesn't belong to me," or no one can tell you that you should not be studying Torah, it's not for you. On the contrary, the Torah was given to every single person. Every single Jew has a part in the Torah. And it's the greatest of all the 3 crowns. As we see, there is a verse in Proverbs where it says that the crown of the Torah is the greatest of all of them. So much so that even if we have a priest, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, but the only problem is that this high priest is not a learned person. He doesn't know much Torah. And then you have someone who is called a mamzer. A mamzer is someone who was born from a marriage which was inappropriate, this mamzer, he is a great Torah scholar. He gets a greater position, so to speak. He gets a greater honor than the Kohen Gadol because he is a Torah scholar. And there is no mitzvah. If we look across the entire Torah, we look across all the various commandments, there is nothing that is comparable to the idea of studying of Torah. The study of Torah is such a great thing that it says that all the mitzvot, all the 613 commandments, are all comparable to the study of Torah. It's equated. They're all equated as equal in regards to the idea of studying Torah. So the Torah is as heavy as all the mitzvahs put together. That's an amazing thing. Because when we study, we will then be able to know, and it will bring us to be able to do the action. If we don't study, we won't know what to do, and we won't do it. So therefore, the studying is so important. And therefore, if a person has in front of him 2 options, either to study or to go do a mitzvah. For instance, if you have a study partner, or you have a time that you study every day, and at the same time, someone needs your help. Which one should you do? Should you study or should you go help them? So the Rambam says like this: if there is someone else that can help that person, in other words, it's a mitzvah that can be done by someone else, doesn't specifically have to be you. Anyone can help him. And there is someone else that can actually help that person. So then you should do your study because that's more important. But if it's a mitzvah that no one else can do, and you're the only person that is able to do this, so then you should put the Torah study on the side and do the mitzvah, because it's a mitzvah which is here right now, and if you're not going to do it, it won't be able to take place. So therefore, you should leave the Torah study for a little bit, go do the mitzvah, and then come back and continue studying afterwards. And the idea of Torah study is such an important and strong fundamental in Judaism that we find that when a person passes away and comes to heaven, and over there they're going to be judging that person for everything that they did in this world, we find that it says in the Talmud, and the Rambam brings it down, that at the time when a person comes to heaven and they're judging them, they're first of all going to ask them, did you have time to study every day? Did you have a period, a set time when you were studying Torah on a daily basis? And that's what they're going to be asking us. So we have to make sure that we have a good answer to give them. And even if a person is studying for personal reasons, not for the sake of actually studying God's Torah, in order to connect to God and learn the wisdom of God, but rather he's learning it, whether he needs it for a degree or for a job or just for he enjoys it on a personal pleasure, or he feels that it sharpens his brain, etc. So even though he might be learning with an ulterior motive, so to speak, it's still better than not to learn it. And a person should learn like that, and ultimately he will definitely come to learn it for the proper reasons. So, what is the way that a person should study Torah? What is the proper way that we should be involved in our study? So if a person is inspired and he wants to do this mitzvah properly, he wants to do it in a befitting manner, and to really be crowned with the crown of Torah, so to speak. So a person has to be very much focused in the study. He can't be involved with everything that's going around him, and then every once in a while he picks up a book and he's reading some Torah. No, that's not the way it works. A person has to really invest himself and involve himself in their study. And if a person is trying to acquire wealth and honor simultaneously as he's trying to study Torah, that's not going to work. But rather, as it says, that this is the path of Torah. You should eat bread with salt, drink water in small measure, sleep on the ground, and live a life of difficulty and toil in Torah. In other words, to eat a good steak and then go study, not necessarily is it going to enhance our study. If it's for health reasons, then we need to be strong and healthy, so then of course we should eat properly, we should be healthy, as the Rambam told us already earlier. But once we have our proper nutrition, so then we should go and study Torah, but not coming from a good feast where we have been indulged in the physical and material, but rather we should realize that the focus is that we're going to study Torah, and therefore we have to be healthy in order to do that. And if we really want to acquire Torah, that it should become ours, we should become united with it, that's the way to do it. And as much of investment, of difficulty a person will invest within the Torah study, that's how much he's going to connect with it and really comprehend it. So maybe a person will say, listen, if I want to be able to study properly, so I can't work, so therefore I'm going to study every day, and I'll get some charity. Actually, no, sorry, my mistake. He's over here. This is another law. He says over here like this: if a person says, well, listen, if I need to have money in order to be able to study, so therefore let me work, and once I accumulate a big amount of money, and I'll have enough money to sustain myself, so then I'll start learning. Well, what's going to be the problem with that? Well, maybe it's going to take him a long time, and maybe it's not going to happen. That's not the way it's going to work. Torah cannot sustain itself in such a form. We have to work, of course. We have to be able to sustain ourselves, but we have to have our fixed times when we are studying. And that should be the goal. That is the main part. And the work is secondary. If we have extra time after we study to work, then we work. And the Rambam says that the Torah, it says there's a verse in Deuteronomy where it says that the Torah is not in the heavens and it is not across the sea. Meaning, this is a very beautiful explanation. The Torah is not in the heavens. What's the heavens? The heavens is someone who is very proud-spirited, a person who's very haughty. And that type of person in the heavens, the Torah cannot rest. And neither is it across the sea. Someone who is involved in the sea, someone who is involved in business all day long, that's not a person who's going to be able to study and really acquire the Torah. Our Torah, although on a physical level, time-wise, we might not have so much time because we have to be busy, but in our heart and in the focus, it has to be extremely etched within our hearts that the time and idea of studying Torah. Similarly, we find that the Torah is compared to water, and the same way water does not stay on the top of the mountain, but rather it flows down. Similarly, the same idea. A person who is as high as a mountain, someone who is very proudly spirited, the Torah will not stay. It's going to roll off. But rather, someone who is humble and lowly and is ready to study, he clears his mind and he's ready to come and study, that's where the Torah is going to come and rest on him. But on the other hand, someone who is indulged in physicality and in materialistic ideas, and now he wants to come from his physical place, from his place of indulgence, and wants to now come and study Torah, that's not really going to work. It's not really going to connect to him. But now comes the other hand, and this is what I started mentioning earlier, that a person who says, so I'll study Torah all day long, and all night long, and I'll never work. So how will I live? Well, I'll get charity. So that, the Rambam says, is a very negative thing. A person who does this is actually desecrating God's name. He's dishonoring the Torah, and he's going to extinguish the light of faith. That person will bring upon himself evil and forfeit the life of the world to come. That's how terrible the Rambam addresses this thing. A person who says, I'm going to live just on charity my whole life, and I'm not going to go and work a day in my life. As it says, do not make the Torah a crown for yourself. Do not use that. Don't use it as an axe of working. In other words, to make a profit off it. We study Torah, and that's what our main involvement should be. But in order to sustain ourselves, we have to go and work. We have to get involved. And the Rambam says that a person who is going to be sustained off charity at the end is going to be a person who will ultimately be stealing from others. And we find, in many places, we find it in Psalms, it's mentioned. There is a verse where it says, if you eat the toil of your hands, you will be happy and it will be good for you. And the Mishnah says that you're going to be happy in this world, and it's going to be good for you in the world to come. And we find that there were great, very pious rabbis back in the generations, that they would, although they were studying every day and they were very involved, they were great sages, but they would work with the toil of their hands in order to be able to sustain themselves. And that's a very important fundamental. The words of Torah will not be permanently acquired by a person who is, as we mentioned, in middle of eating and drinking and enjoying himself, but rather the person really has to involve himself all the way up to the point of discomfort, even if he's tired, to continue to study. As it says in the verse, there's a verse that says the following: this is the Torah, a man should he die in a tent. So it's actually a verse which is talking about a dead body a person that has died in a tent, and then the Torah says that the laws are that he's impure, etc. But over here, so there is the Talmud learns on this and says, where does the Torah sustain itself? Where can the Torah really be acquired? By someone who puts himself all the way through. In other words, he gives up his life to be part of the wisdom of Torah. And only the Torah that is being studied and invested in a really deep way, the Torah that is coming through a hardship, through a hard time, through a hard place from a person where he's really giving up in order to be able to understand. That's going to be the Torah that will stay in their mind. That's the Torah that's going to connect to them. They're really going to acquire it. And if we study hard, we're going to remember our study. And if we study out loud, we're then going to study. We're going to remember what we have studied. And then the Rambam continues and says that even though there's a mitzvah to study a day and by night, to study Torah every day and every night, the truth is that a person will really acquire the most of their knowledge of Torah at night. And we find that the night in general is a very good time to study. And therefore, the Rambam says that a person should always make sure never to waste their evenings, never to waste their nights. Not to sit around and talk or to eat and drink or just to waste their time, but rather we should invest and study Torah in the nights. And someone who studies and is involved in Torah study in the evening, at night, during the day there will be a strand of kindness from God upon them throughout their day. And on the other hand, a household where there is no Torah study going on at night, so then the verse says that, as it says in Job, that all the darkness is hidden away from his treasures, a fire that need not be blown will consume him. That's pretty harsh. And our sages have told us that a person who is rich, who has a lot of money, lots of enjoyment, and therefore his Torah gets a little bit neglected, in the end he will neglect Torah because of being poor, because of lack of money. But on the other hand, if a person who is poor and he doesn't have a lot, and he still invests himself in the Torah study, ultimately he will be studying the Torah and being involved in it when he is rich as well. And this is the idea, as it says in the verse, because you did not serve God your Lord with happiness and good feeling when there was an abundance of everything. So then, if that's what happened, so then you shall serve your enemies. And but on the opposite, it says that if you are suffering in the time of studying Torah, then ultimately God will make you prosper, and then you will be able to study Torah in a time of prosperity. And with that, we complete the chapter of Rambam for today, the Laws of Studying of Torah, chapter 3. Very fascinating laws, very fundamental, I guess we can say, which is giving us an outlook on what is the proper way of being involved in our study. Although we don't have 24 hours a day to be able to be studying, because we are involved in life. We're living in a physical world, and we have to go to work, and we have to take care of our families, and we have to do everything that we have to do. But in the time that when we are studying, we should be there 100%. And it should be something which is etched within our hearts. And even when we're involved in other things, we should be thinking about it, and we should remember that that's a very strong focus of our life. And that's a very, very important fundamental in Judaism. So, we have completed the chapter for today. I wish you all a very good day.